A French soldier stands atop the ramparts of Wissembourg, peering into the dawn mist, when a thunderous barrage shatters the silence. Prussia has come, and with it, the war no one saw coming. In the gilded salons of the Tuileries Palace, Napoleon III paced beneath a chandelier's flickering glow, his shadow stretching long and thin across the polished floor. It was spring 1870, and the air in Paris carried a restless edge, sharp as the bayonets lining the Champs-Élysées. The emperor's face, pale and creased with years of strain, betrayed a man clinging to a fading legacy. His uncle's shadow, Napoleon Bonaparte, conqueror of Europe, loomed over him still, a taunt from history he could never escape. France demanded glory, and he, Louis Napoleon, felt its weight pressing against his chest with every labored breath. Across the council table, his ministers bickered like crows over scraps. Marshal Lebeuf, broad-shouldered and brash, slammed a fist on the mahogany. "Prussia grows bolder each day, sire. Their armies swell, their factories churn steel. We must strike first. Show them France remains the master of this continent." The others nodded, their voices a clamor of agreement, but Napoleon's gaze drifted to the window, where the Seine glinted under a tepid sun. He knew the truth they refused to see. France's legions, once invincible, were rusting, outpaced by a rival whose ambition burned hotter than Paris's grandest forges. Hundreds of miles away, in Berlin's austere corridors, Otto von Bismarck sat at his desk, a predator cloaked in statesman's garb. His office smelled of ink and cigar smoke, the walls adorned with maps crisscrossed by his meticulous hand. The Prussian chancellor's eyes, cold and piercing, traced the jagged lines of Europe's borders, lines he intended to redraw. For years he had nursed a vision, a Germany united under Prussia's iron crown, its scattered states forged into a single, unyielding blade. France, that arrogant relic of empires past, stood in his way. War, he mused, was not a calamity but a tool, and he held the hammer ready to strike. The spark came with the Spanish throne. When Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern, a distant cousin to Prussia's King Wilhelm I, emerged as a candidate, France bristled. Napoleon III saw encirclement, a Prussian king in Berlin, a Prussian puppet in Madrid. His diplomats thundered protests, and Bismarck seized the moment. He played the game with a maestro's finesse, urging Leopold forward, then feigning retreat when France's outrage peaked. On July 12, Leopold withdrew, but Napoleon, spurred by a restless public, demanded more. A guarantee from Wilhelm that no Hohenzollern would ever claim Spain's crown. It was a bridge too far, and Bismarck knew it. The telegram arrived from EMS, where Wilhelm vacationed, a polite refusal penned in the king's measured tone. Bismarck's quill danced across the page as he reshaped it, shortening, sharpening, until it read like a slap to France's pride. His Majesty, the revised dispatch declared, refused to receive the French envoy again and informed him the matter is closed. With a thin smile, Bismarck handed it to his aide. "Release this to the press, let Paris taste the insult." By morning, newspapers in both capitals blazed with the exchange, and the streets of Paris erupted. Crowds chanted for war, their voices a tide Napoleon could not stem. On July 19, 1870, the emperor stood before his council, his voice hollow as he spoke the words they craved. "We declare war on Prussia." Cheers drowned the doubt in his eyes, but deep within a tremor stirred. Had he just signed France's triumph or its ruin? In Berlin, Bismarck leaned back in his chair, exhaling a plume of smoke. The declaration reached him like music, each note a step toward his grand design. He summoned Moltke, his chief of staff, and issued the order. "Mobilize. The hour is ours." The war machine rumbled to life, its gears turning with Prussian precision. Across the Rhine, France scrambled to match it, its generals blinded by nostalgia for victories long past. Neither side grasped the inferno they had unleashed, not yet. But in the quiet before the storm, two men stood at its heart, one chasing a ghost, the other forging a future. And soon, at Wissembourg, the first blood would spill. The dawn mist hung thick over Wissembourg, a sleepy Alsatian town nestled against the Rhine's western bank. General Abel Douay stood on the ramparts, his breath fogging in the chill, his eyes scanning the horizon for a threat he didn't truly expect. It was August 4th, 1870, and his 8,000 men, scattered across the town's stone walls and outlying fields, were a thin shield against the unknown. Orders from Paris had been vague. Hold the border, watch for Prussian probes. Douay, a veteran of Algeria's dusty campaigns, assumed this would be another day of drills and waiting. The quiet lulled him, a false promise shattered when the first cannon roared. Across the river, Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia gripped the reins of his mount, his Third Army, 50,000 strong, coiled like a spring under General Helmuth von Moltke's meticulous design. Frederick, tall and resolute, bore the weight of his father Wilhelm I's expectations and Bismarck's grand vision. Moltke's strategy was clear. Strike fast, overwhelm the French outposts, and carve a path into Alsace before Napoleon III could muster his legions. The Krupp guns, their steel barrels gleaming in the half-light, rolled into position along the eastern ridge. At Frederick's nod, they bellowed, hurling shells across the valley with a precision that turned the morning into chaos. Douai flinched as the first salvo tore through Wissembourg's outskirts, splintering rooftops and sending his sentries scrambling. "Artillery!" he barked, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Man the walls, hold the line!" His troops, a mix of seasoned infantrymen and green recruits, rushed to their posts, muskets trembling in unsteady hands. The French chassepot rifles, famed for their range, cracked in reply, but the Prussian barrage was relentless. Shells pounded the ramparts, stone crumbling under the onslaught. Douai's mind raced. He had expected skirmishes, not this. Paris had misjudged the enemy's intent, and now his meager force faced a tide. Frederick watched from a hilltop, his telescope trained on the town's buckling defenses. Smoke curled skyward, a grim banner of his advance. "Push the infantry forward," he ordered, his tone calm but unyielding. "Flank their left, break them before they dig in." Moltke had drilled speed into his commanders. Hesitation was death in this new age of war. Prussian battalions surged across the fields, their dark blue uniforms a swelling wave against the dawn. Bugles blared, boots thudded, and bayonets flashed as they closed the gap, the artillery softening the French like a blacksmith's hammer on heated iron. Douai saw them coming, a shadowed mass emerging from the mist. "Hold fire until they're close," he shouted, pacing the wall. His men obeyed, their barrels steadying as the Prussians neared. 300 yards, then 200. The chassepots sang, a volley that scythed through the front ranks, dropping dozens in sprays of crimson. But the Prussians pressed on, their discipline a wall of its own. To the south, a second column swung wide, aiming for the town's undefended flank, a move Douai hadn't foreseen. His scouts had failed him, and now the noose tightened. A shell struck the rampart beside him, the blast hurling stone and men into the air. Douai staggered, ears ringing, blood streaking his cheek from a jagged shard. Through the haze, he saw his center falter. Recruits broke, fleeing toward the town's narrow streets. "Rally them," he roared, but his voice drowned in the din. Then came the fatal blow. A Prussian cannonball found him, tearing through his chest in a burst of gore. He crumpled, lifeless, as his aides screamed his name. The chain of command snapped, and with it French resolve. Frederick lowered his telescope, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. "They're breaking," he murmured to his adjutant. "Signal the reserves, finish it." The Prussian tide flooded Wissembourg, bayonets piercing the thinning French lines. By midday, the town was theirs, its walls scarred and streets littered with the fallen. 1,000 French lost to Prussia's 1,300. The victory was small but sharp, a dagger thrust into France's border. The sun dipped low over Wissembourg's smoldering ruins, casting long shadows across the Prussian camp. General Helmuth von Moltke stood in his tent, a map of Alsace spread before him like a battlefield of ink and parchment. His fingers traced the jagged line of the Rhine, pausing where the day's victory had carved a breach into France. The air smelled of gunpowder and earth, a scent that clung to his uniform as he pored over the reports. 1,300 Prussian casualties, a steep but acceptable toll for the prize. Wissembourg was theirs, and with it, the first step toward Bismarck's dream. Yet Moltke's sharp gray eyes betrayed no triumph, only calculation. "Speed," he muttered to his aide, a lean captain scribbling notes by candlelight. "We must press the advantage before they recover." The French had crumpled faster than expected, their general, Douai was it? Felled by a lucky shell. Moltke had anticipated resistance, perhaps a stubborn stand, but this collapse hinted at deeper rot. Napoleon III's army, vaunted across Europe, seemed a hollow shell, its boasts outpacing its readiness. The Prussian chief of staff adjusted his spectacles, his mind racing through logistics. Railroads to ferry troops, artillery to hammer the next line. "Send word to the Crown Prince," he ordered. "Advance on Spitzeren at once. We'll not give them a moment to breathe." In Paris, the Tuileries Palace thrummed with a different energy, frantic, discordant, teetering on panic. Napoleon III sat slumped in an armchair, his hands trembling around a glass of cognac that did little to steady him. The telegram from Wissembourg lay crumpled on the table, its words a lash against his pride. Douay dead. Town lost. Prussians advancing. The emperor's chest tightened, his illness a dull ache beneath the weight of failure. Around him, his war council erupted. Marshal Lebeuf bellowed for an immediate counterattack, while the Minister of War, pale and sweating, urged caution. Their voices blurred into a cacophony, each syllable a hammer against Napoleon's fraying resolve. "We strike back," Lebeuf insisted, his fist pounding the table. "Send Bazaine to the frontier. Crush them before they dig in." The marshal's confidence grated on Napoleon, who knew the truth beneath the bluster. France's mobilization lagged, its reserves scattered, its commanders untested against Prussia's machine. Wissembourg wasn't just a loss, it was a warning, a crack in the empire's facade. Yet the public demanded action, their cheers for war now a noose tightening around his throne. He drained the cognac, the burn sharpening his focus. "Bazaine moves east," he rasped, his voice cutting through the din. "We'll meet them head-on. France does not yield." The decision hung in the air, heavy as the smoke over Wissembourg. Napoleon rose, unsteady, and shuffled to the window. Beyond the glass, Paris glittered, a city oblivious to the storm gathering across its borders. He saw his uncle's ghost in the reflection, stern and unyielding, mocking this faltering air. The emperor clenched his jaw, defiance warring with doubt. Prussia had struck first, but he would rally his legions, prove France's might. It was a gambler's throw, born of desperation as much as strategy, and he knew it. Back in the Prussian camp, Moltke folded the map with deliberate care, his thoughts a lattice of contingencies. The French would retaliate, he counted on it. Their pride, their emperor's fragile grip, demanded a response. He envisioned their columns marching east, clumsy and overeager, ripe for the trap he'd set. Bismarck wanted a swift war, a decisive blow to forge Germany in fire, and Moltke intended to deliver. "Double the ammunition trains," he told his aide. "They'll come for us soon enough, and we'll be ready." Dusk settled over Wissembourg, the town's jagged silhouette etched against a sky stained red. Smoke drifted from shattered homes, curling like specters above the debris-strewn streets. A French corporal, his uniform torn and face streaked with soot, stumbled through the wreckage, his rifle lost in the rout. Behind him, the cries of the wounded faded into a mournful hum, swallowed by the rustle of Prussian boots securing their prize. He clutched a crumpled letter, orders from Douay now meaningless, and pressed westward, driven by a single thought: warn Paris. The border had cracked, and the enemy was through. In the Prussian camp, Otto von Bismarck stood beside a crackling fire, his broad frame casting a shadow that danced across the trampled grass. A courier had just delivered Moltke's dispatch. Wissembourg taken. French scattered. Losses within bounds. Bismarck's lips curved, a rare flicker of warmth breaking his stony mask. He lifted a glass of claret, the liquid catching the firelight like blood. "To Germany," he murmured, sipping deeply. The victory was a pebble in the stream, but its ripples would swell. Bavaria, Saxony, the southern states would see Prussia's strength, their hesitance crumbling before the promise of unity. He turned to an aide, his voice low and firm. "Tell the king we march on. This is only the dawn." The corporal's boots sank into the mud as he crossed a field littered with fallen standards, blue, white, red, trampled beneath the day's fury. His breath came in ragged bursts, each step a prayer that he'd reach a telegraph station before the Prussians cut the lines. In his mind, Douay's final shout echoed, drowned by the shell that stole him. The war had begun not with trumpets, but with a roar, and France's eastern wall lay breached. Bismarck set his glass down, the fire's glow glinting in his eyes. He saw it all unfolding, Napoleon's inevitable counterstroke, Moltke's iron trap closing, a nation forged in the crucible of conquest. Wissembourg was a signal flare, lighting the path to Berlin's triumph. He stepped into the night, the distant thud of artillery a drumbeat to his ambition. The corporal paused, glancing back at the glow of Prussian campfires. Ahead, darkness swallowed the road to Paris. In Berlin, Bismarck's gaze lifted to the stars, unyielding. The war machine rolled on, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a greater clash loomed.